This is a scary and sad story, which I heard from the elders in the village. In the 1990s, there was a young wife named Lu He in the neighboring village. Her parents were from another place, and she gave birth to a daughter not long after she got married. The man in the family went to work in other places and could earn a lot of money every year. Lu He raised her daughter alone. Although it was hard, she was lucky that she didn't have to worry about food and drink at home. During the New Year and other festivals, she could still buy a few feet of cloth to make new clothes and a flowery skirt for her daughter, so she lived a happy life. However, there are unexpected events. When Lu He's daughter was 5 years old, she was unlucky and suffered an evil disaster, almost losing her life. This story started with a well near her home. The well was under an old locust tree and was an abandoned well. It had been abandoned for a long time, with a huge stone pressing on the well and weeds growing all around it, which looked gloomy. People walking by the well often felt chilly, not only shivering, but also making the well look more gloomy and scary. What surprised Lu He was that the villagers seemed to be very taboo about this well. In the midsummer, the villagers liked to gather under the big tree to enjoy the cool and gossip. The old locust tree next to the well was lush and leafy, and there was a cool breeze underneath, which was the best place to enjoy the cool and escape the heat, but no villagers had ever been there to enjoy the cool. Sometimes the children in the village played near the well, and the adults always had gloomy faces when they saw them, and hurriedly called the children aside and scolded them in a low voice. It seemed that there was something terrible in the well that could eat people. Lu He also asked her husband what was going on with the well and why it was sealed by stones. But her husband was hesitant and vague, and he refused to tell Lu He no matter what. He only said that the well was evil and asked her never to go there alone in the future. This made Lu He even more curious about the well, but she was a little scared in her heart. I suspect that there is something harmful hidden in the well. Lu He usually won't go near the well, and sometimes she will avoid it if she has to pass by. But there is a small river near the well, and the villagers will go to the river to wash clothes. Standing by the river, you can see the well when you look back. Every time she washes clothes, Lu He always feels that someone is staring at her from the direction of the well behind her, but she can't see anything when she looks back. One foggy day, when Lu He was washing clothes by the river, that strange feeling came again. She couldn't help but look back at the well, and through the thick fog, she vaguely saw a person standing at the edge of the well. Very short, it seems to be a child. It is looming in the fog, and the face is blurred, and the appearance is unclear. It looks like a little girl with 2 pigtails on her head. Lu He was surprised. In such a foggy day, whose child is playing here by himself? So he said, "Why are you here alone, kid? Where are your parents?" Lu He suppressed her fear and shouted at the child. The child didn't react, still standing quietly by the well, as if staring at her. Lu He was a little panicked, her heart was beating hard. How could a normal child not say anything? Lu He thought, could it be that she had a flower in her eyes? She swallowed her saliva, plucked up her courage and slowly walked towards the child, wanting to confirm. When she came to the well through the thick fog, the fog in front of her was blown away by a gust of wind, and there was nothing behind the fog. Lu He breathed a sigh of relief and laughed at herself for being suspicious. Just as she turned around and was about to leave, she suddenly heard a voice, hee hee, hee hee. It was a child's laughter. The voice was childish and innocent. However, this childish laughter seemed extremely terrifying in this foggy and gloomy place. And this laughter seemed to come from the well blocked by a huge rock. Lu He was immediately frightened and ran away, not even having time to take the clothes by the river. She ran home in one breath and still felt scared. After that, she became even more afraid of the well, and even had to go to the river to wash clothes with others. On the day her daughter got into trouble, Lu He went to the river to wash clothes again. Before, she went with a young wife from a neighbor's house, and her daughter was left to the neighbor to help take care of for a while. But that day, the neighbor's family went out of town to visit relatives, so Lu He had to take her daughter to wash clothes by herself. But she didn't expect that after washing the clothes, she looked back and found that her daughter was gone. Where could a child who just turned 5 run to? She hurriedly searched for her in a hurry. When she found the well, she was stunned and suddenly had a bad feeling. The stone on the well was lifted by someone. The stone was big and heavy, weighing hundreds of pounds. I'm afraid no one in the village could lift it. Who did it? Without time to think about it, Luhi hurried to the well and looked into it, and her heart was immediately gripped. Her daughter really fell into the well, but fortunately she didn't sink yet, and was struggling in the well water. She told her daughter not to be afraid, hold the rope tightly, and then she went to call for help nearby. Unexpectedly, when the villagers who were familiar with her heard that her daughter fell into the well under the locust tree, they suddenly changed their faces and refused to help. Luhi was anxious and worried, not knowing what was wrong with the villagers. When she was anxious, she fortunately met a neighbor's family coming back from visiting relatives. The male owner of the neighbor's house was called Juzi. He and his man grew up naked and called brothers and sisters. They had a good relationship. Hearing that her daughter had fallen into the well, she went down the well without saying anything and fished her daughter out. After the little girl was fished out, she didn't cry or make a fuss. She stood aside and played with the flower headband on her head. Seeing that her daughter was fine, Luhi felt relieved. After thanking Juzi, she took her daughter home. But what Luhi didn't expect was that her daughter was a little abnormal after a few days. She was no longer as smart as before, but lifeless all day long. She liked to stay still by herself, and sometimes she didn't respond when she was called. She also liked to stare at people with her eyes straight, and muttered something that others couldn't understand from time to time. Her behavior was very abnormal, and she was completely different from before. Luhi thought that her daughter might have been scared by falling into the well, so she called her soul several times. It was useless, so she took her to see a doctor, who prescribed a bunch of medicine. After taking it, her condition not only did not improve, but became more and more serious. Sometimes she would sit up in the middle of the night and stare at Luhi with her head tilted. Luhi was frightened several times, and her daughter's condition did not improve. Luhi was worried every day. Not long after, the neighbors knew about this. The neighbor's mother-in-law told her privately that the well the child fell into was evil, and the child might have a weak disease. If she really couldn't do it, she could go 30 miles south of the village, to a village called Erdayapo, to find a person named Wangu. Wangu was a fortune teller, or what is commonly known as a fortune teller. It is said that she was very effective in fortune telling. Luhi had no other good ideas, so she took her daughter to find Wangu. Wangu's house was not big. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary villager's house. There was dried corn hanging outside the door. After entering the door, there was an incense burner in the middle of the yard, with a thick layer of incense ash inside. In the main room, there was smoke curling up. Wangu was burning incense and worshipping the gods. Wangu was in her 50s or 60s. She looked like an ordinary rural woman, nothing unusual. Seeing someone coming to her house, she politely poured a cup of hot water and handed it to Luhi. She asked her to sit down and rest her feet, and she would talk slowly if there was anything. Luhi told Aunt Wang about the child while drinking water. Aunt Wang looked at the child, opened her eyes again, and saw a red line in each of the child's eyes. Her expression gradually became solemn. Luhi saw that Aunt Wang looked bad, and her heart suddenly skipped a beat, and she asked hurriedly, "What's wrong with the child?" Aunt Wang said, "This child has red pupils and red lines in his eyes. It seems that he was indeed hit by some dirty things, and suffered from a weak disease." But Aunt Wang paused, and then continued, "It doesn't matter, I have seen a lot of such things. As long as you do what I say, the child will be fine." Aunt Wang told Luhi, "Go home quickly, find a big rooster that has been raised for more than 5 years, and pierce the cock's comb with a needle. Take out a few drops of chicken blood and drip them on the girl's shoulders and forehead respectively. Then put the big rooster in the house when you go to bed at night." Aunt Wang said, "This person has 3 young fires on his body, one on his shoulders and the other on his forehead. They can remove and suppress evil spirits, so that some dirty things cannot get close. But people with weak bodies, or the elderly, children, women and children, who have insufficient yang and weak yang fire, are easily targeted by some evil spirits and pounce on them, causing them to become weak and sick. Chickens are poultry that pursues young, and they are the best at suppressing evil spirits, so there is a saying that the crowing of a chicken can break the blood on the cock's comb is the purest and most young thing, full of young energy. Dripping chicken blood on a person's shoulders and forehead is like adding oil to an oil lamp, which can make the young fire burn more vigorously. The dirty thing was burned by the 3 young fires in the girl's body for a night, and if it didn't die, it would be seriously injured. The next morning, if the chicken called again out of the blue, no matter how powerful the evil spirit was, it would scare her to death and scatter her soul. After listening to Aunt Wang's words, Lu He felt a little relieved. In the countryside of that era, every family raised a few chickens, and a 5-year-old rooster was not uncommon. Lu He found one and took out the chicken blood according to what Aunt Wang said. But when dripping it on her daughter, something went wrong. The chicken blood turned into gas with a cheese sound as soon as it dripped on. Just like water dripping on a red-hot stove cover, it evaporated in an instant, leaving no trace, and it was like this for many times in a row. After taking the chicken blood 3 or 4 times, the big rooster ran around in pain, no longer as majestic as it was when it first came. He didn't know if this was normal. She dripped it on her daughter's shoulders and forehead a few more times, and felt that it was almost done, so she coaxed her daughter to sleep. But she herself almost didn't sleep all night, just hoping that dawn would come early and her daughter would get better quickly. It was almost 5 o'clock in the morning before she couldn't help but fall asleep. When she woke up, it was already noon. She hurriedly looked at her daughter, wanting to see how she was, but she saw her daughter squatting on the ground, not knowing what she was doing. She stood up and came to her daughter's side. The scene in front of her made her shudder, and she almost ran away. The daughter was holding the big rooster in her hand, and the neck of the big rooster had been twisted off. The head was drooping, and the chicken blood kept dripping down and flowing all over the ground. The daughter just held the chicken and stared at Lu He. She giggled in her mouth, and Lu He's scalp was numb. Lu He was scared and anxious. Seeing her daughter become like this, her life was in danger, and she didn't care about being afraid for a while. She reached out and took the dead chicken from her daughter's hand and threw it away, and took her daughter to find Aunt Wang again. When she told Aunt Wang about the situation, Aunt Wang's face suddenly changed and said, "This thing on my daughter is not afraid of even chickens, it's not simple. It seems that the usual method is not going to work, and I can only find a godfather for my daughter." Aunt Wang said that the reason why the girl was entangled by dirty things was not only because she was weak, but also because she had no ancestral protection. For people from large families or children of noble families, the most important thing during festivals is to worship their ancestors. Why do the more noble children care about worshipping their ancestors? Because they know that when the family encounters disasters, their ancestors will sit in to protect their descendants from disasters. That is why many famous families have been prosperous for many years, but ordinary families often don't care about these. They don't offer tablets to their ancestors, don't worship their ancestors, and cut off contact with their ancestors, so they can't receive the ancestral protection and get the blessing of their ancestors. When encountering some disasters, naturally there will be no ancestors to help. And this ancestral protection is also the blessing accumulated by the ancestors over the years. Some families have ancestors who do good deeds and accumulate virtues, and this blessing will gather descendants, blessing their descendants to have a prosperous fortune, no disasters, and no evil. Let the child find a blessed person as a godfather, that is, find a backer for the child, borrow the blessing of others to help the child turn misfortune into good fortune, and let the ancestors of others protect the child. But Aunt Wang frowned and said, "In your daughter's situation, it is probably useless to find an ordinary person as a godfather, so you can only try him." Lu He hurriedly asked, "Who is he?" Aunt Wang did not say it clearly, but gave Lu He a bowl of white rice and a pair of chopsticks, and asked for the child's birth date and 8 characters to be engraved on a longevity lock, and asked Lu He to take these things out of the village. Walk along a dirt road to the west for more than 20 miles. At this time it was almost dark, and you would see a remote village. Not far after entering the village, you will see a peeled locust tree, and behind the locust tree is the man's home. You stick the chopsticks on the rice and put them at the door of his house together with the longevity lock, and he will know what it means. If he is willing to accept the rice, then the matter will be settled. He will naturally lock the longevity lock for you. The longevity lock must be locked by the Godfather himself, which can avoid disasters and prolong life, and turn misfortune into good fortune. When the time comes, you can give the longevity lock to your daughter, and her life will be locked. And with him as your daughter's godfather, your daughter will be saved. After a pause, Wangu continued, but this godfather cannot be accepted in vain. During the holidays, don't forget to take your daughter to see him and burn a few incense sticks for him. Luhi was a little confused when she heard this. Ghosts have to burn incense, so why do living people have to burn incense? But she didn't think about it carefully, and took her daughter and took the things and set off. I don't know how long I walked, until it got dark. Luhi finally saw a desolate little village in front of her, which should be the village that Wangu said. After entering the village, Luhi found something wrong. This village is very strange, with fallen leaves underfoot and the road surface covered. There are half-human high weeds on both sides of the road, and no one takes care of it, giving people a desolate and dilapidated feeling. Is there no one in this village? Luhi felt a little strange and continued to move forward. There are many peeled dead trees and dilapidated houses around, and those houses seem to have been uninhabited for a long time. But there are candles in every house, but no one can be seen. The flames of the candles are reflected on the window paper, flickering and swaying, shaking Luhi's heart and feeling uneasy. Such a big village, but there was no sound, no human voices, no dog barking. The silence was terrifying. Strange, where are the people in this village? Luhi muttered, and walked forward carefully. After a while, he saw a big locust tree, and the bark was also peeled off. There were several mud brick houses behind the locust tree, one of which had a candle lit and the door was closed. It seemed that this family should be. Luhi went forward and knocked on the door, and then, as Wangu said, he stuck the chopsticks into the rice and put it at the door with the longevity lock. Not long after, he heard the cough of the old man in the house. Luhi saw two figures reflected on the window paper, both hugging each other, and they seemed to be an old couple. An old man and an old woman. The old man stretched out his hand from the crack of the door and took the rice and the longevity lock into the house. He kept sniffing the rice, looking very hungry. The old lady seemed unhappy, scolding him for being greedy, asking him not to eat and return the rice to avoid trouble. The old lady's voice was very strange, with a sharp tone and a vague sound, which made people feel uncomfortable. The old man ignored the old lady's words and continued to smell the rice. He burped while smelling it, as if he was full. He put down the bowl and threw the longevity lock out from the crack of the door. Luhi picked it up and saw that the longevity lock was already locked. She knew that the matter was settled, so she hung the longevity lock around her daughter's neck. Just as she was about to leave, a voice suddenly came from the room. It was the voice of the old man. The old man said, "Since we have become godparents, don't leave tonight. This village is not peaceful. There are many weasels and wild dogs at night. You should stay here for one night." It was late at night, and Luhi was afraid that there would be danger if he walked on the night road. Although she thought the old couple was also very strange, and even the whole village was weird, after all, it was Aunt One who asked her to come, and she thought the old couple were not bad people, so she agreed. When she pushed the door open and went in, the old couple disappeared, and no one responded after calling a few times. He guessed that the old couple probably went out through the back door, and felt that they were really weird people, letting her stay, but she left. But she didn't think much about it. Seeing that there was a Kong in the room, she slept on the Kong with her daughter. She slept in a daze at night, and vaguely heard the sound of ping ping pong. It was like someone was fighting, and the sound was noisy. It seemed that there were quite a few people, and they kept tossing for most of the night, and the sound gradually disappeared. He thought it was the sound of the wind outside and didn't care. He woke up and felt a little cold. The wind was a little strong, blowing her chilly. She opened her eyes and looked, and was immediately stunned. She was not in the house, but sleeping in the wilderness. There were no houses around, and all she could see were graves. She and her daughter slept next to a grave that had been dug up somehow. The two coffins inside were also destroyed, and the bones were scattered outside, which was really scary. Luhi was so scared that her scalp went numb, and she pulled her daughter and ran away. Her daughter giggled as she ran, and the weird look on her face made Luhi shudder. Luhi found that the longevity lock on her daughter's neck had broken, and she was even more terrified. Luhi found Aunt Wang again and wanted to tell her what happened. Aunt Wang was burning incense and kowtowing to the statue. She stood up after a long time. She looked unhappy and frowned. Luhi was about to speak, but Aunt Wang waved her hand and said that she already knew about the matter. Aunt Wang said that Old Yang had told her everything in her dream. Old Yang was the old man Luhi saw yesterday. Aunt Wang said that he was not a human but a ghost. Luhi had long thought that the old couple was strange, but now she was still surprised to hear Aunt Wang say it, and asked Aunt Wang what was going on. Aunt Wang told Luhi that she asked her daughter to recognize that this marriage was a Yin marriage, that is, to find a dead person to be her daughter's godfather. Because the things in the world of the living can no longer suppress the evil spirits in her daughter, she had to find a person in the underworld to suppress it. She was worried that Luhi would be afraid to go, so she didn't tell her in advance, but she didn't expect that she couldn't suppress it in the end, and even Old Yang fell. At this point, Aunt Wang showed a trace of fear on her face. She said that Old Yang was the patriarch of the ghost village. He had great prestige in the village, whether he was alive or dead. He could call all the ghosts in the village. Unexpectedly, he still couldn't beat him, and his grave was dug up and his body was thrown away. When Luhi heard that it was a ghost village, he understood why the village was so weird. He broke out in a cold sweat and was terrified. Aunt Wang told Luhi, although it is a ghost village, there is no need to be afraid. Because the people in that village are all good people, not evil ghosts. Aunt Wang said that the village was also a quiet and peaceful small village in the early years. The villagers were hardworking and kind, and everyone was very good. But then a great famine occurred. The famine was so severe that it swept all over the country. The neighboring counties were also like clay Buddhas crossing the river, unable to protect themselves. The villagers had nowhere to escape from the famine, and most of the people in that village were old, weak, sick and disabled, so they couldn't make it. After the bark was eaten up, the whole village starved to death. But they were unwilling to give up. They had finally driven away the devils and survived the civil war. They thought they could finally live a good life, but they were hit by this once-in-a-century famine. The death was too unjust. They were resentful and hateful in their hearts, and the whole village was full of resentment. Perhaps because of the great resentment, the dead in the village did not enter reincarnation and still lived in the village. That village became a ghost village. Although the people in that village had resentment and became ghosts, they never harmed anyone. On the contrary, they sometimes helped people. Aunt Wang said that she was familiar with Lao Yang too in that village. Sometimes when she encountered problems that could not be solved when she was reading things for people, she would often trouble him. Lao Yang too also starved to death and was greedy, so I often offered him a bowl of white rice. Once Lao Yang too was happy, he agreed to the matter, and this time was the same. I wanted Lao Yang too to help the child, but I didn't expect that the evil spirit in the child was so powerful that Lao Yang too was hurt. Aunt Wang said that she took a breath of cold air when she learned that even Old Yang couldn't suppress the evil spirit. This kind of thing has never happened before, and I don't know where the evil spirit on the child comes from, and it's so fierce. When Luhi heard this, her heart sank. She begged Aunt Wang to save the child. If the child had any accident, she would not be able to live. Aunt Wang thought for a while, quietly pulled her aside and told her, the dirty thing on the girl's body is probably from a big source. No matter what is on the ground or underground, it can't suppress her. It seems that only the Heavenly One can do it. Luhi didn't understand it very well, and asked Aunt Wang what to do. Aunt Wang said that she had to find a bodhisattva to suppress her. She had to use a bodhisattva portrait that had been worshipped for more than 10 years and was blessed. However, it was not easy to find a bodhisattva portrait that had been worshipped for more than 10 years. Whether it could be found depended on the child's luck. After finding the Bodhisattva portrait, hang it in the room where the child slept. In less than 2 days, the dirt on the child will be suppressed and the child will recover. He felt relieved when he heard this. This matter is not difficult to handle. Coincidentally, the grandmother of her neighbor is a Buddhist who has been vegetarian and chanting for many years. There is also a picture of Bodhisattva at home. She told this to Aunt Wang, and Aunt Wang was also very happy, saying, "It seems that this girl is lucky and her life is not over." Without further delay, she asked her to go home and borrow the picture of Bodhisattva. When He led the child away, Aunt Wang sent them out. The child suddenly turned around and said to Aunt Wang coldly, "You are going to die." Aunt Wang was stunned when she heard this. The Buddhist beads she had been holding in her hand for many years suddenly broke, and the beads fell to the ground. He was also panicked when she looked at her strange daughter. After helping Aunt Wang pick up the Buddhist beads, she quickly took her daughter away. After returning home, she quickly went to her neighbor's mother-in-law to borrow the Bodhisattva portrait and hung it in the inner room where she slept. She also offered incense and knelt down to worship the Bodhisattva, praying that she could exorcise evil spirits and bless her daughter to recover quickly. At night, He and her daughter slept in the same bed. She didn't know what time it was at night. She was half asleep and suddenly smelled a strange smell, as if something was burning. She hurriedly opened her eyes and saw the scene in front of her, which made her hair stand on end. The Bodhisattva portrait hanging on the wall was actually burning. In the firelight, the Bodhisattva sitting on the lotus platform had tears in his eyes and a sad face, which was indescribably weird. And the daughter was standing by the bed, looking at the Bodhisattva portrait on the wall that had been burned beyond recognition, giggling. She was still whispering something in her mouth. Late at night, when everything was quiet, the daughter's voice could be heard vaguely, as if she was reciting a nursery rhyme. "When the rats are born, the 9 states will be in great trouble, with piles of dead bones all over the ground, and stones all over the well. Only ghosts can be heard crying at the graves, but no gods can show mercy." The daughter's tender voice made people feel an indescribable chill. He was shocked and scared. She didn't expect that the ghost thing on her daughter's body would not even be afraid of the Bodhisattva. Who could suppress it? She was anxious and locked her daughter in the house. She went to find Wang Gu herself to ask if there was any way. When she arrived at Wang Gu's house, it was already dawn. There were many people standing in front of Wang Gu's house, as if something had happened. He went up to ask, and the words of a bystander shocked He. "Wang Gu is dead." In the morning, she was found hanged on the beam, and Wang Gu's death was very strange. There was no tool to stand on her feet. It was as if she was dragged to the beam and hanged. She knew that this was the evil spirit's revenge on Aunt Wang for meddling in other people's business. Not only did she fail to save her daughter, but she also harmed Aunt Wang. She felt guilty and worried about her daughter's safety. She was confused for a while and ran out stumbling. She walked back crying, and not looking at the road. As she walked, she suddenly bumped into someone. She looked up and saw that it was an old Taoist priest. She also knew this Taoist priest. He was a Taoist priest in a small temple on a nearby barren mountain. He often went down the mountain to perform rituals for people. In the past, there were several funerals in the village, and this Taoist priest was invited. He thought, aren't Taoist priests supposed to exorcise demons and eliminate disasters for people? He grabbed him, knelt down and kowtowed to him several times, asking the old Taoist priest to help her. The old Taoist priest was very easygoing. He pulled her up and asked what happened. He told her the whole story of her daughter being possessed by the evil spirit. When the old Taoist heard that even the Bodhisattva couldn't suppress the evil spirit, he took a breath of cold air and said that this evil spirit was so fierce that it seemed to be really extraordinary, and he wanted to go and see it himself. He took the old Taoist back home. When he opened the door, the Taoist's face suddenly changed when he saw He's daughter. Pulling He aside, he told He that it was no wonder that even the Bodhisattva couldn't suppress it. The one on his daughter's body was not an ordinary evil spirit, but a ghost. As the saying goes, there are thousands of ghosts walking at night, and the ghost is the first. This evil can be said to be the king of ghosts, with resentment and fierceness. Moreover, this ghost is transformed after the death of a person with resentment, and often died unjustly, with cause and effect. Even the Bodhisattva dare not get involved easily, so he couldn't suppress her. But this ghost is fierce, but it is not completely impossible to subdue it. As long as you find out where her resentment is, resolve her resentment, and eliminate her obsession, the ghost will naturally dissipate. The most urgent thing is to know the origin of this evil spirit first, so as to prescribe the right medicine. Lu He didn't know the origin of this evil spirit, but she knew it must be related to the well. So she took the old Taoist priest to the neighbor's grandmother's house. After she told the purpose of the visit, the neighbor's grandmother also knew that this matter was a matter of life and death, so she sighed and did not hide anything. She told the whole story of the well. The story starts with the Great Famine in the year of the rat. At that time, the drought was severe, no rain fell from the sky, and the river area dried up. Not only did the crops in the fields die of drought, but even people had no water to drink. The well under the big locust tree was dug very deep. There was water at first, but gradually the water in the well became less and less, and the water level became lower and lower. The water that was drawn up was all yellow mud soup, which was not drinkable at all. This well was the last source of water in the village. Once the well dried up, the whole village would die of thirst. At that time, the villagers were ignorant and didn't know who spread the rumor. It was said that the reason why the well was going to dry up was because the well dragon king had brought disaster. In order to appease the anger of the well dragon king, sacrifices had to be made, and boys and girls had to be thrown into the well. At first, the villagers didn't believe it. Whoever's child was distressed, who would be willing to throw it into the well, but later, the water in the well became less and less, and even the yellow mud soup could not be pumped out. The villagers thought that if this continued, they would die sooner or later, so they might as well give it a try. So they persuaded a widow in the village to offer her 5 or 6-year-old daughter to the dragon king of the well. As compensation, the villagers gathered a bucket of rice for her. The widow had 2 children to raise, a boy and a girl. At that time, every household had no food to eat, and the widow's husband died early. The family was already poor and had no rice to cook. The family ate tree bark and bran every day. The 2 children were pale and thin, and they could not walk steadily. But a bucket of rice could last for more than 10 days, so the widow was tempted. After all, if they endured it any longer, the 2 children would not survive. It would be better to take the life of the little daughter to save the son and leave a descendant for her deceased husband. The widow lied to the little daughter that she would take her to buy a flower headband, and took her to the well. The widow was also upset. When she came, she cried bitterly and stopped all the way. It took more than an hour to walk a few minutes. When she arrived at the well, the widow couldn't do it. Then he asked his daughter to wait by the well, saying he was going to buy her a flower headband. He ran away and cried loudly before coming back, and pushed his daughter into the well when she was not paying attention. Strangely enough, water gushed out of the well not long after that. The villagers were very happy, thinking that the village was saved. But the good times did not last long, and the water in the well dried up again after a few days. At this time, someone said that it was because there were not enough people to offer sacrifices, and they had to continue offering sacrifices. The villagers were ignorant and believed the rumors. Although they were reluctant, they had to throw their children into the well one by one in order to survive. But all the children thrown into the well were girls, not a single boy. In just a few days, there was no girl in the village. However, the water in the well never rose again, and the villagers realized that they had been deceived by the rumors and regretted it. Fortunately, it rained not long after, alleviating the drought, and the villagers were saved. Later, the famine passed and the village gradually returned to normal. But the well became a taboo for the whole village, and no one wanted to mention it. And people often saw a girl with 2 pigtails standing by the well. She looked up, as if waiting for someone. Some people said that the girl looked like the widow's little daughter, waiting for her mother to buy her a flower headband. So many girls had died in the well, and now this kind of thing happened, making the villagers panic. Not long after, the well was pressed up by the villagers with big stones. The area near the well also became a dangerous place in the village, and no one dared to set foot easily. The villagers would rather take a detour than pass by the well. After listening, the old Taoist sighed and said, "The widow's little daughter was pushed into the well by her own mother, and she was originally full of resentment. In addition, so many girls died in the well later, and the resentment in the well was so strong that it became a place to raise evil spirits, and she was raised into a ghost. Once this resentful soul becomes an evil spirit and is eroded by resentment, it loses its original mind. It became a bloodthirsty evil spirit that only knew how to eat people and hurt people. But although this girl became an evil spirit, she still had obsessions in her heart. She remembered what happened at the end of her life and kept a trace of consciousness. She waited for her mother to come back by the well. It was rare. The Taoist looked at Lu He and said, "But this wait has lasted for many years. Maybe she wanted to come out of the well, because she couldn't wait for her mother, or maybe she saw you with her daughter and was moved by the scene. She thought you looked like her mother and possessed the child, but I think she should have no ill intentions. Otherwise, with the ability of this evil spirit, how could you survive until now?" Lu He was thinking about her daughter's safety, so she asked the Taoist what to do. The old Taoist said, "Now that we know the origin of this evil spirit and understand her resentment, it will be easy. Just find her mother and let her take her away with the flower headband. Her resentment is gone, and her obsession is gone, so it will naturally dissipate." At this time, the neighbor's mother-in-law said, "You want to go to the widow for help, but this is really not easy to do." During the Great Famine that year, although she exchanged her daughter's life for a scoop of rice, she could only eat for a few days. Before the Great Famine was over, her son starved to death. Although she survived, she became crazy because of her son's death. Later, she was taken away by a relative in the neighboring village to take care of her, and she should still be alive now. The old Taoist thought for a while and said, "As long as she is still alive, I have a way." Then he asked the neighbor's mother-in-law for the address of the widow's relative's house, and rushed there with Lu He. After finding the widow, Lu He saw that she was indeed crazy. Her hair had turned gray and her face was full of misery. She held a worn-out pillow in her arms, shaking it lightly, pretending to coax a child to sleep, and whispering something. Her relatives said that she had gone crazy since her son died. Now she holds the pillow as her son all day, coaxing her son to sleep, feeding her son, and even refusing to let go when she sleeps. She said that she wanted her son to grow up white and fat, and that she would marry her son and give birth to a big fat boy in the future. Lu He suddenly felt a little sad and her eyes were wet. She was not moved by the widow's love for her son, but because she clearly had a daughter who died. After obtaining the consent of the widow's relatives, the old Taoist priest took a few drops of blood from the widow's finger, and after returning, he made a paper man and dripped the blood on the paper man. The Taoist priest said, "This paper man is stained with the widow's blood, so it can deceive ghosts." Then he asked Lu He to buy a lot of colorful flower headbands and put them on the hands of the paper man. At noon, the old Taoist priest asked Lu He to tie her daughter to a big tree with hemp rope. He made a gesture and muttered something. The paper man stood up like a puppet being manipulated, and slowly walked towards Lu He's daughter. When Lu He's daughter saw the paper man, her eyes widened. She stared at the paper man blankly, her eyes full of grievance. She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to call her mother. However, her voice was so weak that she never said these two words. She struggled to pounce on the paper man, but was always bound by ropes. Suddenly, a vague figure jumped out of Lu He's daughter's body. The figure was shrouded in a layer of smoke, hazy. It was not clear, but it was vaguely seen that she had two pigtails and staggered towards the paper man. She took the flower headband from the paper man with one hand and held the paper man's hand tightly with the other hand. The paper man took her to the sunlight, and when she first touched the sunlight, she suddenly burst into smoke all over her body, making a sizzling sound. She was just startled, but did not let go of the paper man's hand, letting the paper man lead her forward in the sunlight. The smoke covering her body was gradually pierced by the sunlight, and her face slowly became clear. It was a very cute little girl, with a happy smile on her tender face, jumping forward. However, Lu He noticed that under that bright smile, tears flowed from the corners of the little girl's eyes. Her shoulders shrugged as she walked. Under the sunlight, her figure gradually became fainter and fainter, and she looked very uncomfortable, but she never let go of the paper man's hand, but held it tighter and tighter. Until the paper man's hand was grabbed into pieces of paper, until she disappeared and dissipated with the wind. The Taoist said, she was abandoned for so many years, waited for so many years, and looked forward to so many years, but she could not wait for her mother. Let her mother take her back, how could she let go? She had already got what she wanted and no longer had any resentment when she could wait for her mother to come. Once exposed to the sun, her soul will naturally fly away. The Taoist sighed, as if he couldn't bear it, and shook his head and left. Lu He's heart was also full of mixed feelings. Although the ghost was evil, it was just a child after all. All she wanted was to wait for her mother to take her back from the dark well. In the end, she ended up with a soul flying away, which was also pitiful. She looked at the flower hairbands scattered on the ground and couldn't help but sigh. She turned around and untied the rope for her daughter. The daughter seemed to have just woken up and called for her mother. Lu He picked her up and walked home, holding her very tightly all the way. The end.